Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video we're looking back at some 2015 NBA draft grades over here on Bleacher Report. I've done this for 2016 and 2017 recently, so if you missed those, then go check those out. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day. Alright, here we go. We're going to look at some of these grades, and I'm going to say whether I think it was correct or just what I think about the grade now here in 2020. Beginning at number 1 overall, the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting Karl Anthony-Towns. And if you remember leading up to this draft, for most of the college season, people thought that Jahlil Okafor was going to be the number 1 overall pick. He was a dominant inside scorer. Nobody really in college basketball could deal with his level of post moves and his strength and his size on the inside. But once it got closer to the draft, the versatile game of Karl Anthony-Towns made it more and more clear that he was probably the better selection. They picked him. Bleacher Report gave them an A at the time. I would give this an A+. You can say whatever you want to about Karl Anthony-Towns as a player in terms of the Timberwolves not winning a ton of games in his tenure there. He needs more help, plain and simple. I think it's absolutely an A+ pick, and he's the best player in the class. So I can't really go wrong there. Moving on now to number 2 with the LA Lakers, D'Angelo Russell. They gave the Lakers an A. I would stick with this A. Maybe you could bump it down to a B+. The reason being, obviously, the Lakers didn't get anything really out of this second overall pick. Essentially, this turned into dumping Timofey Mozgov and getting Kyle Kuzma in exchange for D'Angelo Russell, which is certainly helpful, but the way that situation went down in LA obviously wasn't great. They moved on. They got a different second overall pick point guard in Alonzo Ball down the road, but as a player, as a second overall pick, D'Angelo Russell has been an all-star, still young, still time to grow now with the Timberwolves, who obviously got the first overall pick in this class as well. Interested to see what he grows into moving forward, but I think a B+ or an A at number 2 for overall definitely makes sense for D'Angelo Russell. Moving on now to the Philadelphia 76ers, Jahlil Okafor, they gave them an A- grade. Now the problem here initially in Philadelphia was that, one, they weren't very good. They were going through the process, and it was really tough for young players to grow and develop there. But also they had way too many guys in the front court, and Okafor just never really found the correct role in Philadelphia or the other teams he eventually did move on to. He is, he's had some moments with the Pelicans and is hopefully going to be finding a rotation role at some point on a consistent level moving forward now in the NBA. I know he got some good minutes in New Orleans, but they have plenty of other talented front court players as well. His skill set just doesn't fit the modern NBA as well as we thought it did. Never was very good defensively, never an explosive athlete, was really, really good at scoring in the post, and his upside was kind of, Al Jefferson, and he's never really gotten to that point. Hopefully he finds some success, but I think you kind of have to grade this one maybe like a C or maybe even worse, considering the very, very limited value that Philadelphia got out of him for a number 3 overall pick. Moving on now to number 4, the New York Knicks getting Kristaps Porzingis. This is a B+ grade. I would argue that it should be more in the A- to A category, because Kristaps Porzingis, prior to everything that went down with New York and getting injured and then being traded, was the best Knicks pick in a while. One of the best picks that they've had, and someone that fans weren't really that excited about when he was first brought in, but really blossomed into a fantastic player for them, and then everything went down the way that it did. They had to move on from him. But as a pick, I think this is more of an A- or an A. Moving on now to number 5, the Orlando Magic, Mario Hezonja. They gave this an A-, and people were excited about the potential of Hezonja as an athlete, as a shooter, and certainly the Magic needed help in the backcourt in terms of scoring, as they have needed for seemingly forever. Just never worked out there or New York or in Portland. He doesn't really look like he belongs in the NBA a lot of the times when he's on the floor. And this, if you want to go this harsh, you could honestly grade this as an F, because they really never got much out of Hezonja. And it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the way things worked out for him. Not a very good pick at all. Number 5 overall. Number 6 now, the Sacramento Kings. One of my favorite prospects in this draft class at the time was Willie Cauley-Stein out of Kentucky, him and Karl Anthony-Towns playing together. And his whole thing was versatility, especially defensively. The ability to step out in front, guard pick and rolls, switch, stay in front of smaller players. That was his whole thing. And the offensive game would hopefully come along afterwards, right? And in Sacramento, he had some good years, but his offense never developed beyond just being a rim roller, and defensively wasn't as good as you would have hoped, in terms of staying in front of guys and protecting the rim and things like that. And so he's just really struggled to find a role to this point in the NBA, has now moved on to the Warriors, and I think you have to give this more of like a C or a C-. He gave the Kings some good years, but as an NBA player is definitely struggling to hold on to a career. Number 7 now, Emmanuel Mudiay with the Nuggets out of China. He initially, came out of high school, was going to go to college, and then decided to go overseas instead, and had one of the worst rookie point guard seasons in terms of a high minute season that we've ever seen in the NBA. Never really found his footing with the Nuggets, has bounced around to a couple of different teams, is with the Jazz now. Hopefully he can find his footing, but this is a run of a couple of picks, and it's not going to stop anytime soon, beginning with Hezonja and now moving on to Mudiay, then to Stanley Johnson and Frank Kaminsky, which we can all talk about here at the same time. These picks just didn't work out. I mean, Johnson had a nice first year with the Pistons where it looked like he had those raw physical tools that were going to allow him to be a really good defender in the NBA. That never developed. Kaminsky never, further improved upon the offensive game that he brought with him into the NBA and just wasn't a good enough athlete to compete defensively or on the boards a lot of the time. And these picks in a row here, Hezonja, Cauley-Stein, Mudiay, Johnson, Kaminsky, had varying levels of success with the teams that drafted them, but for the most part, they're just, tail end rotation players at best right now. And so I think you have to give all these guys like a C or worse at this point when you're talking about top 10 picks that really didn't make that much of a contribution to their teams. Next up now, number 10, Justise Winslow to the Miami Heat got an A. And remember, this was the crazy story. I did a video about this where teams were willing to move up to select Justise Winslow. I believe it was the Celtics were willing to move up to number 9 with the Hornets, give them a whole bunch of draft picks to get Justise Winslow because they knew that the Heat would take him if he was there at 10. The Hornets ended up taking Frank Kaminsky instead, lost out on all those draft picks, and Winslow ended up with the Heat. I still believe in Justise Winslow. I think that he can be a good piece in Memphis whenever he does get healthy, someone that is good with the ball in his hands. Hopefully he gets better as an off-ball player, but a really good athlete and a versatile player that you can kind of ask to do a lot of different things. I think the A grade is too high at this point, given that he never really turned into what you would have hoped. I think a B or a B plus would be more accurate at this point for Justise Winslow, with the opportunity for it to increase if he can find his footing now in Memphis. Moving on now to a number 11, the Indiana Pacers, Myles Turner out of Texas. They gave them a C minus, and I think this is more of a B plus type grade, especially when you're considering some of the bigs that were taken in front of Myles Turner that he ended up becoming better than, like Cauley-Stein and like Frank Kaminsky. He turned into someone that was a really good rim protector and has a developing jump shot. Whether it's a long-term fit in Indiana alongside now All-NBA caliber player Domantas Sabonis, I don't know, but Myles Turner has been a borderline all-star caliber player at times, and at least has shown flashes of that, so I don't think it's fair to give them a C minus here for the number 11 overall pick getting a player like that. I think a B or a B plus with some potential improvement moving forward, kind of like Justise Winslow, is more fair for Myles Turner. Number 12 now, the Utah Jazz, Trey Lyles, they gave them a C+. Another guy similar to these picks back here with Kaminsky and Johnson and Mudiay and Cauley-Stein, just never did a whole lot with their initial team. Ended up with the Nuggets for a little bit, is now with the Spurs. Still kind of waiting to see, what eventually is going to happen with Trey Lyles at this point, along with all these other guys I mentioned. Kind of the same story. A C+, I would give it more like a C or a C minus, especially when talking about value for the Nuggets and the teams that he ended up on. Moving on now to probably the most interesting lottery selection to this point, the Phoenix Suns getting Devin Booker at number 13 overall. They gave this pick a B, and obviously Devin Booker developed into one of the better scoring guards in the entire league. And at the time, he was seen as this really, really good shooter in college, right? But he wasn't really given much of an opportunity in college to show that he could do anything other than shoot because they needed him to shoot so badly at Kentucky. Then he got to the league and was just enabled to do pretty much everything for them offensively, especially later on in his rookie season, and then continued to grow and develop beyond that, and has turned into a really, really good scoring guard. I don't see how you could grade this as anything other than an A plus at number 13 overall, especially when you're considering guys like Emmanuel Mudiay, Mario Hezonja going before him in this class. Number 14 now, the Oklahoma City Thunder, Cameron Payne out of Murray State, gets a C+, had some productive years at certain points in his career, but never really developed into anything, and is now, is he even in the league anymore? I know he was on the Bulls for a minute. Regardless, he's not been that productive of a player, right? Moving on now, number 15, Kelly Oubre. It says Hawks. He ended up with the Wizards. They gave an A-. He ended up developing into a nice wing. They moved on from him. He ended up in Phoenix. I think an A- to a B+ is fair when you're considering value for the number 15 pick. Kelly Oubre is a nice, solid player that you can definitely work with as a perimeter wing. I think that's a fine grade there. Moving on now to number 16. This is the worst graded pick to this point. Terry Rozier out of Louisville with a D grade. And that's really interesting because I think the mindset at the time was that the Celtics didn't need another guard, certainly not another small guard, right? Like they had plenty of other guys that they could fill into that role, and people just didn't like the fit or taking Terry Rozier this high. Now, he ended up becoming a fine player for them and was really important in that one postseason run when Kyrie was hurt, but maybe didn't have a huge impact on the team and now has moved on to Charlotte. As a player, though, this has to be a better grade, probably a B to a B plus at number 16 overall. Moving on now to Rashad Vaughn. We talked about him in the Christian Wood video recently. Out of UNLV, got a B plus, never really did too much for the Bucks. That certainly is not an accurate grade. Somewhere more along like a C minus or a D would be probably more accurate. Anything else here that is remotely interesting? Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, the Nets traded for that pick. I believe they traded Plumlee for the pick. He never really turned into anything. Larry Nance Jr. is kind of interesting, was at least semi-productive at times for the Lakers as well as the Cavs. RJ Hunter was someone that I was excited about that I thought could be good in this class. Had a good run in the NCAA tournament and just never found his place in the league with the Celtics. They gave him a B plus, turned out to not be a great pick. Kevon Looney at number 30 overall to the Warriors, B minus. That has to be considered a better grade at this point. Cedi Osman, a B to the Timberwolves, ended up on the Cavs. Again, probably a B to a B plus grade at this point. That's good value. Montrezl Harrell, B plus to the Rockets, ended up on the Clippers and is one of the 6 Man of the Year contenders every single year. I think that's more like an A minus to an A pick when you're getting that level of value at number 32 overall, even though the Rockets weren't the ones that capitalized on that value. Outside of that, Pat Connaughton is relatively interesting. Other than that, not too many, crazy late round value type players here in this draft class. So an interesting class, getting guys in the lottery like Devin Booker. Terry Rozier had a nice career to this point, but it's really about the first couple of players selected, right? Karl Anthony-Towns, D'Angelo Russell now, maybe not so much immediately after he was drafted, has turned into a nice player. Kristaps Porzingis, I still think is one of the higher potential players in the entire league and is in a really good situation now in Dallas. And then, like I said, Devin Booker. Not the strongest draft class outside of Towns, Russell, Porzingis, and Booker. And especially, the bigger disappointment here is some of the players that could have at least been rotation pieces, but never really developed into that. I mean, Kaminsky gets some minutes. Winslow will wait and see on. Turner is nice, but I mean, Moutier, Johnson, Cauley Stein, these are guys, and Herzonia, Jahlil Okafor, these are guys that you would have hoped would have at least found a way to be role players in the NBA, and that just has not happened for them to this point in their careers out of this class. But yeah, let me know down in the comment section below if you think there is one grade here that is wildly different that I didn't talk about. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I will see you all next time.